To How Equipment Evaluations Drive Sales and Customer Loyalty. We've got Andy Campbell here from TractorZoom to share how accurate data and integrated evaluations help create a smoother buying experience for both dealers and customers. A little bit about Andy. He's the Director of Insights at TractorZoom. He leverages the company's vast equipment database combined with expertise in business, engineering, and agriculture to provide data-driven insights into the used farm equipment market. Andy specializes in transforming complex data into actionable strategies. His passion for data storytelling, coupled with the ability to design, implement strategically aligned systems, allows him to drive meaningful impact to dealerships regarding people, processes, and technology. Welcome to our virtual stage, Andy Campbell.
So first of all, thanks you guys for having me. I was able to catch just a little bit of that last conversation, and maybe without intention, I think it's going to dovetail nicely. Just because I'm down here in Waco talking at a dealer summit, and the conversation that I just got out of was how do they take their data and make it AI actionable, even though that, asking people to define what is AI actionable, what does that actually mean, kind of a big question mark, just because people are in such different places of where they're at in terms of cleanliness of data, what they're going to use it for. And so we'll chat about that a little bit through here. So even though it might be old used equipment, doesn't mean that the data has to be old, that it has to be outdated. So I think it'll all dovetail nicely. And yeah, let's begin. So one of the pieces with the used equipment process, if you want to go to the next slide here, is that we want to grow market share, right? So you want to grow your new sales, but then if you want to click to the next, you got to be able to sell used. And if you're going to sell the used, you can click, and then that's going to turn the wheel so you have more absorption, which is going to be your higher profitability parts and service. Now, if you can do the used effectively, you can turn this wheel a lot more quickly, and then you essentially get to the used being the linchpin of doing that whole thing. But call it a linchpin, call it gold. It also will weigh you down like gold. And for a lot of dealerships, they're experiencing this now, that the amount of used that's sitting on their lot is pulling them down. So depending on the ag store that you're in, depending on the dealership that you're running, it might be a necessary evil that's out there, but we want to make it as short of a necessary evil as possible. And then our main goal with a lot of this, and you're going to see this throughout this presentation, and in the one I just gave, this was the topic that we talked about, was time. If we're going to make any kind of enemy out of this, we're already facing a lot of things externally that we can't control, interest rates being one of those, but we can control the amount of time that we hold something, and that it weighs us down. So we're looking at efficiencies through a lot of what I'm going to talk about here. So on the next slide, that my background and just briefly about me is, as well as Director of Insights at TractorZoom, I used to be an engineer and a professor. I focused a lot on just efficiencies and optimization of processes. That dovetails nicely with looking at this data and helping dealers work with farmers and moving equipment, because I also farm up in northern Iowa. We've got a row crop operation. And so that helps me provide a little bit of context to what I'm going to talk about here. So on the used equipment process, we're going to run through a really quick example here. And the summit that I'm at right now is a Vermeer summit. So there might be some Vermeer examples in here, but we just talked a lot about balers. And with the used equipment process, let's run through some numbers just so we can kind of understand the importance of time as it relates to the used equipment. So you can click and we'll see that we're going to trade in a 605N, a relatively newer model of a Vermeer baler, and say, well, let's trade it in, get a trade, and let's give them $45,000 for it. But if we're going to have a reconditioning cost, maybe it had a few more dings than what we were anticipating, that ended up being $3,000. Our total cost in is roughly $48,000. We're obviously not wanting to sell it at $48,000, so let's list it for $55,000. Now, we haven't incurred this yet, but we do need to be cognizant that there is interest rate out there. So at about 11%, let's assume we have about a $500 a month holding cost if we hold it. So if we sell it right away at an actual selling price of $50,000 because except for in 22 and 23, we weren't actually selling equipment for what it was listed for. Those times are likely gone. So let's say we sell it for 50, it's still above our cost. So that equates to a little bit over a 4% used margin. Not great, but not horrible, still positive until we hold it for 4 months. And with balers, that's not out of the realm of possibility. And honestly, with a lot of the equipment that we're tracking right now, the aged inventory for a lot of it is over 4 months. Now, if we happen to hold this thing for a year, now we're losing $4,000 on it, roughly about 8% if we end up holding it for that whole year. What that roughly is equating to with 11%, almost 12% of the carrying cost is 1% per month. So throughout the rest of the slides that I talk about, I want us to kind of keep in mind this whole 1% per month, because if we're trying to think of things as efficient, if we have a 1% of a cost per month in our mind, now all of a sudden a baler becomes real. A combine that's, could be $250,000, $500,000 sitting on the lot, that becomes real money, and our inefficiency becomes real money. And that's going to probably pull into many parts of the sales process. So on the next slide here, the goal, again, if we want to fuel dealership growth and increase market share, you can go to the next, that we want to talk about these aspects. The trade piece in the middle is what a lot of people think about when they think about the used equipment process. So you've got your evaluation, your appraisal process, going out to the farm and saying, okay, here is the piece of equipment. I'm going to gather as much information as possible. And then I go to the next step of let's apply a value to that for that valuation piece. And then you have to be able to track that as well. But with the used equipment process, there's just a lot of other steps that tie into it. And it's becomes a kind of convoluted all over the place. Do you start with, sales, marketing, or do you just focus on the used trade process? And this slide that's up here now, this people, technology, and process is probably the best construct of the way to think about the used equipment process, especially if you want to try to improve your used equipment process, because it does involve people, somebody that's actually doing the job. It involves a process, and the more process orientated you can make this, because for a lot of your at least larger ag used equipment processes, you're doing this over and over. And so if it has to be new, if you're reinventing the wheel every single time, then you don't have continuity. It takes longer. It's harder to improve. And then finally, you've got the technology piece. So technology can take many different forms. What I'm going to talk about a lot today is some systems. And so you can think of it as, software systems that guide you through, but it's also data. And this is where it dovetails into that last conversation that we had with AI. And that's going to be a big piece of this. Now, obviously, in any kind of Venn diagram, you get success that sits in the middle there. And that's true. But if you want to make success bigger, what you literally need to do is just push these 3 discs to get them to overlap as much as possible. That's the way you can maximize your success, literally, by doing this. But if you think about it, that's also the way that you can maximize your success as much as possible when your people are seamlessly doing a process. So you've got change management there, and your process is tied in with the technology that automates it as much as possible. So now it's not you're going through a pen and paper or rekeying in figures or whatever. It just happens. And then people get to do what they're naturally good at, which is, I heard a speaker in the last presentation talk about just give your people back more time to be real people. And then they get to do what they're best at. And so, again, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is taking those 3, moving them over each other as much as possible, and sharing some best practices with dealers that we work with. Okay, Michelle, you can go to the next slide. And so real briefly, some of you, and I just kind of looked at the attendee list here, a lot of people that I recognize some names as customers. And so you might not need an introduction to TractorZoom, but for those that aren't familiar with TractorZoom, we have TractorZoom.com, which is a one-stop shop. You can find, farmers can find the equipment that they're looking for. We are not an advertising company, so we're strictly a data company. We don't charge for any of that equipment to be up there, free listings for dealers and auctioneers. What that does, though, it increases our database of equipment values, of equipment supply vastly. And so we leverage that data to help people find the right kind of comparables if they're doing trade-ins, to understand the machinery supply better, the market trends. And that's our TractorZoom Pro. So you can find your comps. And on the Anvil Pro on the side, it is a dealer intelligence platform that leverages data and automates workflows within a dealership. It typically sits on top of a DMS that a dealer uses and just takes that technology and that process piece that I was talking about and just completely overlaps them. So you have automated workflows, so steps don't get dropped in your data. And this is a big piece of what I'll talk about later. It's clean just because it's naturally has a data governance side. So the data in is clean, the process is clean, and you can do so much more with it. So that's what TractorZoom is. This is kind of what it looks like if you had the actual platforms and a lot of the different dealers we use. And the way that we really got here, and then in the next slide, is everything that we built. And we are not, I wouldn't proclaim to be an expert on the used equipment process. Literally, I have just working with TractorZoom, and we are really good at listening. And we work, just blessed to work with a ton of great used equipment managers all across the country. We're able to listen to best practices that they do. We get to see what works. We get to see sometimes what doesn't work. And that's a lot of what I want to share with you. And that's kind of how we build our platforms too, is we just build solutions for dealers so they can take this, job that they have to do, whether it's the marketing, whether it's taking new, used and washing out the cycle, absorption, and then eventually just building an automated performance culture that's high. We help them do this circle better. So getting to the process. And I should mention, you have the people, the processes, and the technology. I cannot help you with the people side. I've got 3 kids, and they're not old enough to be labor for you yet. So I'm going to stick with mostly the process and the technology piece of it. But getting to this process piece, the marketing, sales, quoting to some extent, because it is an important piece of sales. I'll spend a good amount of time on trade. I'll even hit on repricing strategies of what we've seen work, and then and also the sold not invoiced. So going to the marketing piece next, that the marketing side, and I should preface this because I know even in the conversation I was just in with dealer principals down here in Waco, is people are at different points in the progression of using technology and then growing as a dealership. There is information in here that everybody can use wherever you're at. Some people, like this number of touches at the top, it might literally be, if you're a 1-store location, it might be pen and paper or an Excel sheet, and that might just be where you're at, and that's fine. Some other people are saying, hey, I've got 10 stores, I've got 20 stores. An Excel sheet doesn't work for me anymore, which is where you get into the software and the huge efficiencies that can provide. So I try to make a lot of these best practices applicable across the boards, no matter where you're at. But the one thing you do need to do for marketing is understand how many times you're touching your customers. And I'll get to the next slide in a second, but what kind of customers are you touching and how often? You have to be able to measure that. So you can say, hey, our A customers, we're reaching out to them once a week. And conversely, you have some D customers, some people that might just come in and buy a low-cost mower. You can't be touching them once a week. They've got other things they need to worry about. You have other things you need to be worrying about, but you've got to be able to measure that and have some idea. The other piece, the lead management, and this has been the hottest topic that we've heard from our partners so far this year, is we all know that the ag economy is down. We know that times are tighter, likely going to be tight at least throughout this year. We'll see beyond that. And so anybody that's looking to do business with you, you cannot drop the ball on that. And from a leadership standpoint, they want to know how many leads are coming in, from what sources are they coming in, and then can I tell how responsive we are and following up with them. And I used to cite research when I was back as a marketing professor, but the number one factor in how well somebody perceived a service is responsiveness, always. And so if you're highly responsive on following up with a request, even if it's just a request for more information, if you're responsive within a minute or two, you have a much higher likelihood of winning the business, even if it's compared with 1 hour. And a lot of times people say, hey, 2 hours, we need to respond. If you can change that, excuse me, within a minute, you're going to see some kind of improvement. And if you happen to be like, I'm getting back with them within a day, you've got to break it down into hours, even if it's an automated response. And then the final thing is, again, this is largely for bigger ag, but it's important. If you're taking in used, if you have some kind of buy bid program of every used that I'm going to take in, asking your salesperson or whoever's in charge of taking that in, who is going to be your next customer? Who are going to be your potential 3 buyers for that piece of equipment? And if you can somehow take it one step further and make the sale before you make the trade, and so it's already spoken for, you're going to help yourself out a ton, because every month that this sits on your lot is that 1%. Okay. On the sales side, then this again is, don't want to say it's low hanging fruit, but I want to say this is probably a next evolution within data that we see coming, is how many dealerships out there are really segmenting their customers and segmenting them well. A, B, C, D customers is what I hear referred to a lot. There's a lot of different marketing terms for how you want to segment, but you do need to understand it's the Pareto principle of roughly 80% of our benefits are coming through 20% of our efforts. And so within your customers, your A customers are those 10 to 20% of your customers that are providing 80% of your revenue or your profits. Also within segmentation, farmers typically will naturally fall into washout cycles. So there will be some farmers that are always first-time buyers. There will be some farmers who are typically second machine buyers, and there'll be the thirds, the fourths, and the fifths. And that it's not a degradation on who they are or whatever. It fits their strategy within their operation. For me and our farm in Northern Iowa, we are typically a second or a third time buyer because we're focused on being a low-cost operation. And everybody has their fit. Now, I will say over the past couple of years, and this is a big crux within the industry right now, a lot of those second-time buyers are not showing up to buy right now. And so it has a fact to do with they kind of jumped the gun the last couple of years because of massive profitability and buying programs. But regardless, it's creating a bit of a hiccup in this washout cycle. But if you have a good segmentation on these types of customers, all types of customers, you know who to go to when you have that kind of equipment stacking up, and you're not trying to blast out information across your whole platform, across all your customers for people that don't care, because you only have so many shots to send them marketing material. The participation has to do with the participation. Are you participating in your area of responsibility for just, call it 30% of the potential customers, which tends to be a lot of the dealerships say, hey, I've got my salespeople that they know the people that are out there. They've got their book, they've got their, the people that they're comfortable with. That is your 30%. They know that percent. But what about everybody else? They might be a different brand, but they also might be a different brand and ready to switch right now. And how do you make sure that you're doing complete coverage over the area? And from a sales manager standpoint, what kind of visibility do you have to make sure that they're completely blanketing the area like they should? And then the last piece on the sales, and like I mentioned earlier, that this managing momentum, even the segmentation and targeting, they can be marketing terms, they can be sales terms, but they just kind of fit well here. And this appraisals piece certainly is a used equipment piece. But when your salesperson goes out and evaluates a potential trade on a farmer's lot, there is momentum there. There's an opportunity for that salesperson to start up a conversation to get the farmer excited about what might be their next purchase, what might they receive in a trade-in. And with that appraisal process, one thing that we've done, we partner with Ziegler Ag on this, is built a mobile application that allows them to do appraisals on the farm. It automatically gets sent back to their UEM. They do a centralized valuation, and then they can finish that evaluation in 7-10 minutes and have some kind of answer. Even if it's not a final offer to the farmer, they can give them a ballpark figure while they're still on the farm, and then they can get back to them so much faster. And from a farmer, if you're managing that momentum, you essentially, you haven't let them leave the store. You haven't let them leave that moment, and you've got a much higher likelihood to advance the deal without driving away. Because as soon as you drive away, the momentum falls, they look elsewhere, they open up other options, they go do chores, they're onto something else. And so again, shortening the time gap helps in many different ways. Okay, on the quoting piece, and again, I know quoting is a subset really of sales if you're thinking about the whole sales pipeline process, but it applies in different ways. So part of it is just ease of pulling in anything that's appraised or approved for numbers, so you're not making mistakes. That's kind of setting the bar kind of low so you don't make mistakes, but that's a common thing that we see. The other piece on the traceability is quote history. Uh, I'll get to repricing used equipment later, but a lot of used equipment managers we talk about say, hey, it's not just what's going on in the demand in the market and the trends that we see out there, but it also is like if this piece of equipment has been quoted 10 times and there's a lot of interest in it, I'm going to price that thing differently than something that hasn't been touched in 6 months. If you don't keep that data of the quote history, you won't know that. Or you have to go search for it manually. And now all of a sudden your repricing process has taken you forever. Gets back to the inefficiency side that when you quote something, if it can be logged and if it can be readily accessible, then your repricing process is more accurate and way faster. And then you also, you don't double quote. You don't, if you're multiple locations, you're not quoting the same piece conflicting. One store is offering one price, one store is offering another price for the same piece of equipment. You can certainly get yourself in a bind there. So having your quoting streamlined in digital helps. On the trade process, so this is typically what people think about when they think of the used equipment process, and it's key. It's important. It focuses on appraisal, valuation, and tracking equipment. Which, well, I'll say that tracking equipment is something that was a bit of a surprise to me that it was even an issue. But we've had a dealership approach us saying, "Hey, it was an issue. Can you help us solve it?" And when we started to figure out the dollar values, that the inefficiency in the dollar values that were associated with it, the problem was way bigger. But it was kind of a silent killer that can lead to a lot of increased holding costs. So let's go to the next slide for the appraisal piece. If you're doing appraising, and again, like I said, we have a digital app that some dealerships are ready for. They've got the system set up and they're ready to use this. Other ones, as long as you have consistent data collection, you can be a step ahead of where you are. So if you're single store location, do you have a guided sheet that says this type of information is absolutely required for row crop tractors, for combines? I'm going to look at all of these and make sure they evaluate all those pieces and take the right kind of pictures at the right time. Teaching the people just SOPs on take this picture from this particular angle, because getting to the speed part at the bottom, I can now take a picture and send it to my marketing team so they can upload it online and I can start promoting this piece of equipment before it ever reaches my lot. As soon as you know you're going to take title to it, you can start promoting it if you have the right pictures. But if you don't, then you have to wait for it to come in, probably get it cleaned up again, and get it up, and you could be wasting a ton of time. So consistent data collection, and the more that you can automate this, is just going to speed up that time, which again gets to be that 1% per month. On the equipment tracker piece, the piece that I said I was a little blind to, that if you lose track of the equipment, and we've dealt with some dealers that they'll pull it in off a trade, it'll sit on the back lot waiting in queue before it goes into the shop, sometimes out of sight, out of mind. And if it does that, then how long is it actually sitting there? And if you're saying like, oh, this could describe us, it could describe our dealership, let's say it sits on the back lot for a month. Take all your equipment, your inventory, assume that happens to every piece of equipment for a month. Take that times your total inventory level, 1% of that. And that adds up a lot. And so just simply getting it through the shop and getting it ready for sale helps a ton. And then the final one on the valuation, and this is the bread and butter of our TractorZoom Pro product, but it's where we got our start from too. It's having the good data to make good decisions and being able to confidently say this is a valuation on the piece. Because if you start out in a bad spot on a valuation, and this could be from having bad data, it could also be from a strategic choice or maybe even a non-choice of the dealership, where they a salesperson might be allowed to put in a trade-in value but not be responsible for the resale of that piece. Then they may artificially place a value higher so they can encourage their trade. But then now you have an overvalued piece of equipment that you have to try to move. It won't move. And if you base your price on your trade price, it may sit there for a year. Now you're talking 11, 12% loss in holding costs at least. And that's if it doesn't get dinged or, become obsolete. So it could be much, much greater than that if you start out with a poor valuation. So having the good kind of data narrowed into your region and being able to quickly find everything with the right kind of features it just makes the used equipment manager or a sales manager, whoever's placing that valuation, their job so much easier. This is a screenshot of our TractorZoom Pro dashboard. And the reason why I put this in here is because we had a small dealer that we visited about a year and a half ago, was using our product, obviously, for some valuation pieces, but he also said that he uses it for when farmers come in with, saying they, in this case, they wanted a baler. And they said, I've got a baler to trade in for you. And they would squabble back and forth on price. Usually the farmer had an idea of like, I saw this one auction this one time and it brought this much money. It was amazing. And mine is amazing. The dealer would take this and bring the farmer to his side of the table and say, well, here are all the auctions that's happened all across the country. And let's filter down to our area. He was in Iowa. And so he filtered down to Iowa, said, here's the 10 auctions that happened this past month for your model. And they would look through them, and then they could click into each one, and they saw the outlier, but then they also saw the other averages, and really got to start having a conversation that was transparent and brought them, to a decision much, much faster. Sorry, you can cancel that. I made that hyperlinked. I tricked you on that one, but that just helped spur it on their conversation, and improved their sales process. And in the efficient transfer, this is actually an extra piece that, the more efficient you can be if you're transferring pieces back and forth between locations, that it helps speed up the process as well. Okay, on the next slide. So the repricing strategy, and then we'll get to the sold not invoices piece. But on a repricing strategy, we have seen this all over the board from a lot of different used equipment managers. And even back in 2021, when we were really starting to pick up a lot of dealership clients throughout the country, a ton of them at that time, and for good reasons, considering where the used equipment market was, on their yearly goals, they had developed a repricing strategy on there, but there's no clear-cut prescriptive way to do it. So we kind of took best practices from what we're hearing all over the place, tried to simplify them, and a lot of the best practices that we heard were, obviously, you need to start with good data. If you don't have good data to start with internally and externally, it's almost a non-starter. So we try to evaluate and help people get to that first step there. After that, kind of came up with this TIRE acronym. So when you do a repricing process, you need to have some kind of periodic frequency that you're looking at your equipment. It could be a 30, 60, 90, 180, 360, but it has to be preset. And ideally, if you have an automated system, when it comes in, timer starts. And so you don't have to try to remember. It reminds you to take action at the 30, 60, 90, whatever it is. The next piece is the insights. So like I mentioned, the quote history, key to know how hot the piece of equipment is. Also, most people, especially true when we had long lead times a couple of years ago, you need to know where the industry is going in 6 months, 12 months in some. And so having an idea on your industry trends, some of this is qualitative, to know, hear what the trends are doing. Here's what's happening with tariffs. Here's likely where this commodity market's going to go. And a lot of it is also quantitative. Here's the trend of this particular model. And based on this trend, this, so many years old, this is more than likely where it's going to be worth, what it's going to be worth after it picks up 250 more hours after this next year. And so that's stuff that we baked into our product. But having that kind of information at the get-go is important. The next piece, on the range and then the execution piece. On the range side, it helps from a leadership standpoint. So for any dealer principals out there, to give guidance in terms of, we want to be a premier dealer provider, an equipment provider in the area. We're okay with being 3 to 5% above market average. Some other ones want to move faster, and they say we want to be 5% below market average. Giving that guidance to whoever's making that repricing decision helps them move faster. And then finally, the execution piece, based on the time, how quickly are you going to adjust the marketing when you look at it at 30 days? Maybe sales gets a different spiff at 60 days and they're moving it around, taking different pictures. When is a cutoff time to say we're going to wholesale this, or at least put it up on a wholesale marketplace, or contact our wholesale team or external contacts? And then when is a drop dead date for auction? Because I can tell you that a lot of the demise that we've seen is when somebody places a value on it, you have an emotional tie of like, I bet that it was worth $200,000 and it's not bringing it. And now it's a personal hit to their ego when it doesn't bring 200,000, and they might hold on to it for longer. So helping people take that emotion part out of the decision, and then just saying, this is drop dead date. It's going to go to auction at X months or at the next auction period in the next quarter, and be done with it. Because you don't want that weight hanging you down. Okay, on the sold not invoiced, and this is again kind of a silent killer, similar to the equipment tracking, is I bet most dealer principals out there know what their accounts receivable is, and even the age of their accounts receivable. It's just a big financial metric that's probably be presented. Do you also know what your sold not invoiced number is? And this is, less apparent, doesn't always show up in the financials, because when something gets sold, when something gets delivered, there's sometimes when the invoice to the farmer is not yet delivered. So making sure that sold and invoice piece is happening, so then you can get paid in a timely manner. Again, if it doesn't go tracked, if it doesn't get managed, it doesn't get measured, and it's not improved. So you need that visibility into cash flows, and make that a repeatable process so the ball doesn't get dropped. Okay. I think, yeah, here's just an example within an automated system. So you can see, what's in the sales process, what's reviewed, and then actually settled and invoiced. If you don't have this visibility, then you don't, you could be missing out again on 1% per month, and you've already sold the equipment. It's not even sitting on the lot anymore. So again, a best practice that we've seen. Okay, so that was the process piece. And as you can tell, some of that was technology, because it overlaps with the good, best practices that we're seeing. It overlaps a lot. Another piece on the technology is obviously the data side. And so this gets to the conversation was that we had last. Our data scientists and I are holding a webinar here in a couple of weeks, and it's almost strictly on AI, future of data within dealerships, because we're getting so many questions on it. And so he helped build this graphic here on how you can evaluate your data, especially as it's could be used for AI. And so if someone says, how clean is your data? How good is your data? These are three of the main points that you can evaluate it on. First piece is access. So can you draw your data out? And can you draw it out, period? But is it, on the far right side, is it automatically extracted that it pulls within your decision-making system? It doesn't require you to download a CSV and then, move it on to one person to another. But all the way to the right is it flows seamlessly into whatever decision-making process we have. That's great. The input and the output is a little more nuanced, but it's going to be important for AI. And I think, I cannot remember who just said it before I got onto this, but he was saying, like, you have to teach your system. And think about this input and output as how you teach a system. An input is telling your system all the variables that are out there. So we have all these input variables that are clean, that describe our equipment. That's an input variable. The output data is all these variables are in. What is the answer that I would expect? Because just like teaching a kid, you can't just say, 2 + 2 is the equation. What's the answer? You have to at first tell them that the answer is 4. That's your output data of what should you expect. And AI models, if you're building one or if you're working with a supplier to build one, they need to know what to expect so it can be trained. That's what that middle piece is. And then finally, the clean part is what we hear a ton of. But I will say we've worked with small dealerships that are very diligent and have great clean data. We've worked with very large dealerships that are the same way and not the same way, to where, we'll see CSV outputs of DMSs, and it's all over the board. Just because it could have come through an acquisition, it could have come through, one salesperson was in a hurry and never had data governance. So they, would put in, what kind of tractor is it? Well, it's a 4-wheel drive. And that's it. No model, no make, no serial number, no hour usage. It's really hard to make decisions when you're just basing it off of a 4-wheel drive tractor that could be $5,000 or it could be $500,000. So the cleanliness and the data governance to get it to be clean consistently is another way you can evaluate your data. Okay, I've chatted enough about that data, and I'll go through these a little quicker. If you're a used equipment manager, or if you are a sales manager that's in charge of used equipment, or even a dealer principal, and you say, I want us to have a good used equipment department, there's two main axes of data. You've got your supply and demand, which are important if you're going to come to any economic decision. And you've got your data, but it's either internal data or external data. And this makes up this matrix of 4 here. You need this all this kind of data to make a really good decision. So your internal data that's revolving around supply has to be like a lot of pulled from your DMS. So what's the cost of your equipment? How old is it? Model, make, number, any categorization that you have so you can sort through it and work through it. So that's your used equipment data. You can click to the next two, I think. This is an example of a CSV output of, a DMS. And then the next one. So you've got that supply data again, but now it's external. And this is what TractorZoom Pro really provides. What are your comparables? Can you access them quickly? Is it easy for your used equipment manager to understand, hey, I'm looking at a 8R 310 that's a 2021, has this many hours, it's coming from this particular state. What is it worth? And can I pull it up almost instantaneously? That's great. Or can it even feed a model so that I have this where I need to make a decision? Okay, that's an example of your supply external data that's out there to help you make that decision. So some comps on some Kubota tractors with loaders. Can you filter it down and get to what you need really fast? Because if you got to do a ton of these in a day, you don't want to spend 30 minutes on one. You want to spend about 3 minutes on one. Okay, and then on this is just our automated system within TractorZoom Pro, getting to the point of like, get to make your decision, have it evaluated, and then get to your next part, get your next piece of machinery, and then move on. And then on the demand side of your data. So internal demand this is the quote history that I was talking about. And I know that some dealerships are in a different place than others. If you can automate your quoting or at least digitize it and have a record of it all, easily to pull up and then cataloged, it makes a big difference if you can catalog it somehow. So that's an example of the internal demand hotness of what you have. Okay, and on just an example of our quoting tool that we have that catalogs this and shows your margins off to the side while you catalog it, but it saves it, which is the big piece, and gives you history. And then finally, and this kind of is going to dovetail into what I typically talk about in a lot of my market trends, is the external demand. What is the market doing? What has it done? If we can understand what it has done, that helps us to kind of understand a little bit of where it might be going to. Because as much as we all want a crystal ball, there's still a ton of variability, especially if you kind of consider the tariffs that are out there and what the administration might do. It's anybody's best guess. But there are some things that help guide us and give us a good probability of what might happen. So on the next few slides, I'm going to go through the market trends of what we're seeing. And like I said, I've got a webinar coming up in a little while. We'll go into more depth on this, but I wanted to at least give you a little bit of value for what we're seeing in the market today. So this was a USDA projection. Well, it was close to certain because this came out, I believe, in December of 2024 by the different regions of what their year-over-year net farm income was from 23 into 24. And one thing that we really saw in 2024, if I had to dissect the year, is June, July, August stunk for used equipment sales. We saw a lot of values drop. We saw an increase in supply. Demand was not there. And we're projected to be a 9% lower year-over-year net farm income. Well, harvest happened. And especially in the heartland, Northern Great Plains area, the yields were much better. Some of the row crop values or the commodity values increased just slightly, but it was really the yield side that we produced way better than what we were anticipating. And then we ended up not losing as much. And the equipment sales thus picked up in November, December. And the main takeaway here, and this shouldn't be a huge surprise to anybody, but equipment goes where cash flows. And if we keep that mantra in mind, that'll help us kind of understand what might happen here in the early parts of 25 and going on. So, and this is really where a lot of my talk here at this summit down in Waco just revolved around where it might go. So on the next few slides here, supply. So, supply is one that needs to be taken into consideration because it can throw off your supply and demand equilibrium. And so what we saw in 22 and 23 is that profitability didn't always matter because supply was either too tight or then it was into 23 and especially into 24, it was in excess. And with higher interest rates, that would make the values fluctuate quite a bit. Well, we are in a little bit of a different ballgame now. Ever since about mid 24, throughout the end of 24, now into 25, for most categories, not for all, but for most, we have this flatlining of total dealership inventory that's out on the market right now. And what that does is it takes a variable out of the equation. So now we don't have to think about supply fluctuating greatly for most categories. We just have to think about cash that farmers have and future potential profitability. And so it just makes it simpler for us to look forward into the future for most categories. I'll hit on a few of the categories that are caveats to that right now. But this is a good thing that we have steadiness in the system. So high horsepower tractors, so 425 and up. This is one that's a caveat. So clicking on the next slide here. That graph looks different than the last one that we saw. Year over year, almost a 50% increase in the overall amount of supply that's out there for these large tractors, largely your large four-wheel drive articulating tractors, heavy pulling tractors, doing tillage work. This is significant because these things are also so expensive, and they're a big risk for farmers to take on. Now, if you want to look at some silver lining here, if this was looked at, 3-4 months ago, it was almost a 70% year-over-year increase in supply. We've started to tail off that you can see up there from October, November till now. It appears that we might have this growth in supply under control, although we are seeing slower sales here in January and February. So on the next slide, we get to see what effect this has had on values. And I'll leave this up here for just a second so I can kind of decipher. This is our data from TractorZoom Pro that we pull out. Across the top is average list price, which can have many different factors. The dotted line is the average anonymized sold data that our dealer partners will see. And again, this is for high horsepower tractors, somewhere between 1,000 and 4,000 hours. And so that's all averaged in there. But what you're seeing from the actual sold dotted line from the teal top list price is a separation. You're not quite getting the margins that we were, certainly not back into early 23, not what we were seeing in 24, starting to just see that separate more and having to negotiate essentially lower to move those items, whether it's spiff or just pure negotiation or trade values. What we're also seeing on the bottom blue line is auction values, which tends to be a leading indicator on where the market is going. Like I said, summer of 24 stunk, and we really saw some deep declines in valuations. And like I mentioned, when I was talking farmer profitability, October, essentially Q4 of last year, it got a little bit better, not a lot, but a little bit, and that slowed the decline. Still, what we're witnessing is an auction drop at about 17% on average from this time last year. Certain models more so. And really what we're seeing is the higher horsepower, or the higher price, the late model stuff is taking a pretty big hit. That's pretty steep depreciation value for some. Once, especially high horsepower tractors, once you get into that scraper special stuff, the stuff that's really high horsepower will last forever. They tend to hold a decent resale value and they don't fluctuate nearly as much. Also because they can be sold to construction companies. So anyways, that's all wrapped up into the price somewhat. Okay, large round balers. I'll go over this one quickly just because I just talked about it with these forage guys, and a lot of them prefer not to take in used if they don't have to, but sometimes you do on the trade-in piece. The forage market has been buffeted a little bit by profitability that the beef market has seen, both in the dairy and the beef cattle side, but they're not immune to just a waning farm economy. So overall supply that we saw that we'll see on this next slide here is down. Sales are also down. So not dealing with the massive oversupply. This is kind of a good number. This down negative 28% on the overall supply, but then they are seeing lower sales that you see in the bottom teal line as well. And then on the next slide here, want to talk about utility tractors. And then one of the reasons, again, I'm not hitting on every single category that I possibly could that's out there, but on the utility tractors, a big reason why I pulled these up is because I think a lot of dealerships right now are going through, whether it's by choice or whether it's by, a force of hand, are being touched a lot by urban areas. And I see it a lot down here in Texas between Dallas and Austin, that you have urbanization happening and a lot of the farms are being forced out because you can sell your land a lot higher to an urban developer than you can another farmer. And so that's changing business models, but it doesn't always have to be bad. And these utility tractors can be a big part of that story, to where, yeah, that you need them for smaller cattle operations. You can also sell a decent utility tractor, or certainly a compact tractor, to a acreage owner, and their price sensitivity is lower. Their willingness to pay is higher. And you can have a new type of customer base if you're suited to take care of them. And so 100 to 175 horsepower tractors, they're kind of on the cusp of suffering from ag, benefiting from residential sales, at least if they're a big acreage residential. So on the next slide here, what we're seeing is still a little bit of an increase on the overall supply that's out there. But I will tell you that in urban areas that I've talked to down here, especially for that 100 horsepower, this is the type that I'm seeing a lot down here in Texas, is their sales are fine, that they can sell these. As you go a little further up north, I think the sales are softening, what you're seeing by that negative 37%, because of the down grain markets and people being hesitant right now. But that's not across the board. This is a national chart right here. So this one is really affected a lot by regionality, which, again, you're not going to have a farmer or a dealer in Iowa necessarily ship one utility tractor all the way down to Texas just to take care of a little bit of arbitrage and get a $500, $1,000 better. So these tend to be a pretty regional type of a piece of equipment, unless you're going to send a bunch across the country. So again, takeaway here is it kind of depends on where you live. And nationally, we're seeing the turns go down, but again, regionality matters here. The next slide we have here is depending on your used equipment manager or your direct sales, whoever's applying values. I just took this snapshot out of our TractorZoom Pro database, and this gives an idea of where values are. This is just one of our market trends graphs that they can pop up, but they get to see where values are now. The blue and the dark blue at the top are lists compared with this year in light blue, last year in dark blue. And then the green and the dark green happen to be auction values. And so you can start to see how those have changed over years for different price categories. And so they'll pull this up. They're very familiar with these graphs if they use them a lot. And they can start to see, okay, we're priced higher than we were last year, but I see this trend changing. And they'll use this a lot for lease residuals as well. So you can say, if I sell a tractor or plan to get it back with 1,000 hours, here's roughly of where my end point needs to be. So again, having data accessible for when you make the decisions is a big key part of this. And then also, again, regionality. It's one of the big questions I get asked down here in Texas, because they said, we're not corn growers. What we get for our equipment is different than what you guys get. But this gives you an idea of hotspots. So whether you're looking to resell, or if you even want to filter down, which you can, to say, I just care about the Southwest region or the Northeast region, it makes a difference, especially for certain types of categories of equipment. But being able to filter to regionality is important. Okay, and then let's see. Okay, so I think this is going to come close to wrapping up, which time-wise, this should work well. And I kind of understand that once you hit this middle part on the used equipment process, it becomes a scattering of a lot of best practices. But if you can think about this, again, getting back to the earlier part on the people, the processes, and the technology, and getting those to overlap as much as possible, while spinning the new to used wheel as fast as possible. Essentially, you want to crunch that used time period to as short as you possibly need it to, because nobody likes giving away 10, 11% in holding costs. That'll just eat your profits away faster than you can spin your head. That's key. And how do you do that? You have to get more efficient, process-based. So again, if you're a dealership in ready for automation, ready for software that will help you get there, great. Even if you're a one-store dealership that's not ready for that, there are still processes that you can do to increase your speed, your efficiency, and then keeping some kind of digital trails better for transparency. Those are best practices that we've really seen help increase in the profitability, which is going to be important here in the next few years, because I think we're in a new normal for this ag economy. And again, unless we see a black swan event or something else change, we've got to scale our businesses to be efficient. So this is a little bit of my information. I think the QR code probably takes you to TractorZoomPro.com. Honestly, I put it up last week, but feel free. You can shoot me an email or a phone. And if you have any questions, I love answering them. So, yeah, that's my email. I get emailed by prospects, by clients, by random people that just want to have a good chat about the industry, and more than happy to jump in on those, because I think I gain just as much about hearing what goes on the ground as I possibly can share out. So don't hesitate to reach out.